welcome back to my channel. Today we are going to be talking about the Watts family murders. And this case is so sad to me. You'll see why, but to think that a woman is so happy in her marriage and she's fighting so hard for her marriage, and then to be killed by her own husband, that is just so sad to me. So let's jump right in. Chris and Shannan met in 2010 when they were both living in North Carolina, and they ended up getting married in 2012. And throughout their romance, Shannan had a lot of health problems, and she said that Chris was her hero through all that. He stuck by her side. She said that she actually tried to push him away a lot. I think maybe she was just scared that she did have all of these health issues, and she was afraid that she would fall in love with him and he would end up leaving her because he couldn't handle it. But he proved to her that he could handle it, and he stuck with it the whole time. He even went with her to her colonoscopy. He really was just the perfect boyfriend at the time, so she thought. So they got married in 2012 in North Carolina, and I believe they had their first child while they were still living in North Carolina. But in 2015, they moved to Colorado, and that's when they purchased their house. They had two beautiful daughters. They had Bella, who was 4, and Celeste, who was 3, and family and friends all called her Cece. And they had another baby on the way, and it was their first little boy, and they had decided that they were going to name him Nico. And Shannan was 15 weeks pregnant with little Nico at the time. And it seemed that they both had really well-paying jobs. They both seemed very happy in their careers. Chris worked for Anadarko Petroleum, and Shannan worked as an independent consultant for a company called Lavelle, and she basically sold health supplements. It was called Thrive, and so she worked for a multi-level marketing company. And because she was able to do this independent consulting work, she was able to stay home with her children, and so she was able to be a stay-at-home mom for Bella and Celeste, and she absolutely loved it. She was a great mom. She adored her children. She was so excited that she was pregnant with another little baby on the way, and that's why she quit her 9-to-5 job so that she could stay home with her children. So she worked a lot on social media. She was on her phone a lot, and this is a very important fact that we'll get into later, but it's very important that she always worked on her phone, and that was her main source of income. So it seemed to everybody from the outside and on social media that they were this perfect, happy family, but people on the inside kind of started to see that it wasn't always this picture perfect family. They did file for bankruptcy in 2015, so we know that there was some financial strain, and maybe that put some strain on the relationship. So like I said, a lot of Shannan's close friends kind of knew that this relationship wasn't as perfect as she let on her social media. She began texting her close friends, kind of venting, maybe asking for some advice every now and then about her relationship with Chris. They were kind of growing apart, and I think she started to notice this when she became pregnant, and so she was really trying to find advice, trying to vent, because she did not want this relationship to fall apart. She loved Chris. He was her hero. He was the love of her life, and she did not want something to happen to their marriage. So on August 7th, Shannan texted one of her friends and said, "Chris told me last night he's scared to death about this third baby, and he's happy with just Bella and Celeste and doesn't want another baby." And so her friend texted her back and tried to kind of console her and make her feel better, and she said, "Oh, it'll be okay once the baby's here. It'll be fine." And Shannan texted back and she said, "He has changed. I don't know who he is." And so she knew that something was going on, and I think she started to kind of suspect that maybe there was another woman. and I think that this was really hard for her. Chris had always wanted a son, and now she was able to finally give him that son, and he wanted nothing to do with it, and he wasn't showing up to doctor's appointments. He was just very standoffish about the baby. He didn't really want to ever talk about the baby. And I've seen the pregnancy announcement when she surprises him. She's wearing a shirt that says, "Oops, we did it again." And she seems really excited, and he comes in and he just kind of looks like shocked, almost like, "Oh, this is exciting." And he's saying the words, but the emotion isn't there. So I think she was really upset and hurt that she was able to give him this baby and this little boy, and he just wanted nothing to do with it. So in her text messages to her friends, she mentioned one night as she and Chris were talking, she told him that she didn't feel safe with him anymore after what he said about little baby Nico. And she said, "I just want you to hold me. I just want you to comfort me." And he shrugged her off, didn't give her any comforting words, didn't hug her or hold her. He just went to bed. So like I said, she was starting to wonder if maybe there was another woman involved, and she actually did confront Chris and asked him, "Are you having an affair? Is there another woman?" And he flat out refused, said, "No, there's no other woman. I don't know why you're saying these things." And there was another woman. She told a friend that it had to be an affair because he had done a complete 180. He had gone from being this perfect, loving husband and father to being completely detached and not wanting to have anything to do with any of them. And this was really strange, and she didn't understand. So it had to be an affair because it wouldn't have just happened on his own. He was happy one minute, and then the next, it seemed he was not happy. But despite all of this and knowing deep down that there was an affair going on, Shannan still wanted to fix this marriage. She still wanted to be with Chris and raise their children and have him be a part of their lives and stay married. So I don't know if Shannan ever actually found concrete evidence of the affair, but she was correct. He was having an affair, and it was with a woman named Nicole Kessinger. And I'm not going to get too much into Nicole Kessinger, just because I feel like the story shouldn't be about her. But I will mention that she had some unusual searches in her Google history when the police looked into her. She had been looking into wedding dresses. She had been Googling marrying your mistress. And I don't know if she Googled this before or after Chris did what he did, but she had looked up Amber Fry, and she had looked up how much money did Amber Fry make from her book, and also did people hate Amber Fry. And if you don't know, Amber Fry was the mistress of Scott Peterson, who murdered his wife Lacey and their son Connor. So it is unusual that she was making these searches. They hadn't been together very long, so for her to be Googling wedding dresses and marrying your mistress, that's very strange. It makes me think that Chris was promising her things. And also then for her to make the Google searches about Amber Fry when she was a mistress, that's unusual. So I don't know if those searches were made before or after the murders, but it is interesting, and it is something to kind of keep in mind. So on August 9th, Shannan went on a business trip to Arizona for her company Thrive. And while she was away, Chris let her know that he had gotten a babysitter for the kids because he was going to go to a baseball game with his work friends. But he actually wasn't going to a baseball game with his work friends. He was going out with his mistress. So he was lying, and he actually went to a restaurant, and Shannan had gotten a alert on her phone, I think, because her debit card had been used and it was a high amount. And so she knew at that point, he's not at this baseball game, he's at a restaurant. So I'm sure that she was wondering why he was there. She probably knew, honestly. It probably just solidified what she already knew. So the same day, Shannan was texting her friend telling her that she was feeling really good about the relationship, and her and Chris had had a really in-depth conversation, and that it had been really productive, and that Chris had kind of told her, I really want to work on things, and he had agreed to read a relationship book that Shannan had bought. So she was feeling really good leaving the house to go on her business trip. She thought she was going to come home and they were going to be able to work on things and work things out. So I find it interesting that he was making these promises to Shannan, but as soon as she left, he was going on dates with his mistress. And also he knew that she had been alerted about the debit card. So I think that this is probably when he fully decided what he was going to do. I think he knew the jig was up. I think he knew that Shannan had proof that he was lying. And I think he knew that if he wanted to make a move, now was the time to do it. Shannan arrived home on August 13th at 1:48 a.m. and we know that this is the exact time that she came home because their Ring doorbell made a video of her arriving home. Shannan's friend Nicole Atkinson actually gave her a ride home from the airport, and she's a very, very important person in this case. So we know that she arrived home at 1:48 a.m. and went into the house, and that was the last time that anybody ever saw her again. So later that day, Shannan's friend Nicole tried contacting her. She tried texting her, she tried calling, and she wasn't getting any response. And so she started to get a little bit worried because that was very unlike Shannan. Like I mentioned before, she was always glued to her phone for work. And so she got worried. And so she decided, you know what, I'm just gonna go and I'm gonna check on her. She knew that she was pregnant. I believe that she was diabetic and she had all of those health issues that we mentioned before. And so her friend just decided she was going to go check on her and the girls. So she arrived at their house and she noticed that Shannan's car was in the garage. So that was kind of her first clue that something wasn't right because Shannan's car had the girls' car seats inside. So she knew that they hadn't left the house. So she goes and knocks on the door and no answer. She's ringing the doorbell and no answer. And then she notices Shannan's shoes right by the front door. And she said that she always wore these shoes. They were her favorite shoes, I guess. And she noticed that they were there. So automatically now she's frantic. And somehow, I guess, I don't have one, but with the Ring doorbell, I guess you get an alert on your phone. And Chris got an alert that Nicole, Shannan's friend, was at the door, and so they were able to speak through the doorbell. And Chris said, oh no, it's fine, and Nicole said, no, I'm worried, I'm gonna call 911. I'm afraid that something is wrong. And at that point Chris kind of panicked a little bit and said, oh no, I'll come home, don't call 911. And she said, no, I'm calling. So she did. So police arrived at the house about 1:40 p.m. and Chris wasn't too far behind. And when he got there, he allowed the police into the house. He let them search around. They did not find Shannan or the girls. They did, however, find Shannan's car in the garage, like Nicole had said. They found medications of Shannan's that she wouldn't have left without. They were important. She was pregnant and she needed those medications. And they also found one of the girls' EpiPens. I think it was Celeste, who was like highly allergic to peanuts, and so they had to take that EpiPen everywhere they went, and it was there on the counter. And so red flags are going up all over the place. And then they get upstairs and they find Shannan's phone, and this kind of did it in for her friend Nicole Atkinson. She knew at that point something was wrong, and she did not believe Chris's story. She was telling the police, no, there is something wrong. She would not have left all of these things here. Something does not make sense. We need to figure out where she is. She was very, very worried for her friend. So sometime while the police were at the house, Chris and Shannan's neighbor came over and said that he had video of their driveway. He had a Vivint security camera above his driveway, and it also got their driveway. And so he said, come on in, let's review this footage. Maybe we'll see Shannan leaving, or maybe we'll see somebody coming in and taking them. And so they started watching this footage, and Chris was there, the police officer was there, and this neighbor was there. And as they're watching the footage, they notice nothing unusual, but then Chris backs his truck up into their garage, just far enough in that you can't see what he's putting into the back of the truck. And you can't see anything that he's carrying back and forth from the garage to the cab of the truck. And so this is kind of strange. And the neighbor even said, you don't always do this, do you? And he goes, oh, well, sometimes I do when I have a lot of things to carry, like I did that morning. And they were like, okay. And so they keep watching, and the more they watch, the more agitated Chris becomes. And he's kind of putting his hands on his head, and he's got the bulging eyes, and he just keeps talking and talking. And then when he left, the neighbor said, that's not like him at all. He's normally very quiet. He doesn't talk that much. And the police officer said, okay, that's noted. And another thing that the neighbor noticed when Chris was there and they were watching the footage is that he wasn't really watching it. And the neighbor said in an interview, if that were my family, I would be watching that footage. I would be studying every detail of that footage because I would want to know what happened to my family, and Chris was not doing that. And so it just kind of stuck out to him that, okay, he's acting really strange. He's not watching the footage. Why is this? Another interesting thing about the security footage from the neighbor is that a lot of people have reviewed it and said that they think they see two little shadows walking underneath the truck. You can't see any people, but you can see shadows, and a lot of people think that this was the children, Bella and Celeste, walking out to the truck to be loaded into the truck. So on August 14th, Chris went in and did an interview with the police. At this point, he was denying any involvement. He kept saying, maybe she just left. We were having some issues. She said she was going to a friend's house, and maybe I misunderstood. Maybe she actually meant that she was leaving me. And then as they kind of pressed more about that, he said, well, maybe she didn't leave. Maybe somebody came and took them. And he kind of started putting on some theatrics and, my family, I hope that they're okay. I hope nobody's hurting them. And the police weren't really buying this. They were pretending to because they wanted him to talk, but they already had their suspicions about Chris. So at the end of that interview, they asked him to come back the next day to do a polygraph test. And he agreed, and he said, yes, I'll come back. So at 11 o'clock the next day, he came in to do a polygraph test. And I've watched some of the footage of the polygraph examination, and I feel like the detective or the police officer that did the polygraph test was absolutely amazing. I think that she really did a good job of getting him to trust her, but then kind of throwing him curveballs. And one of the things that she said while he was in there was, it'd be really stupid of you to come in here and do this test if you were lying to me. And he was like, oh yeah. And she said, if you killed them, if you hurt them, I'm going to know it. And another thing she said was, what's really cool is right now only one of us knows the truth, but in about 5 minutes we're both going to know the truth. And so she was just kind of saying things like that, I think, to kind of rile him up and get him nervous, and I think it worked. But she was really, really great at what she did. So they did the polygraph examination, and from what I've seen, to be considered a truth teller, you need to score +2 or higher. To be considered a liar, you would score a -4 or below. Chris Watts scored a -18, meaning that he failed every single question. So at this point, the police knew that they had their guy. They knew that Chris was guilty, But they didn't want to spook him. They didn't want to make him clam up and ask for a lawyer. Because if he asked for a lawyer at that point, they knew that they weren't going to get the confession that they needed to find Shannan and the girls. And that was their main goal at this point. I think they knew something bad had happened, but they wanted to find them. And so they were kind of treading very lightly in order to get Chris to talk more. So once they told Chris that he had failed the polygraph test, he pretty immediately asked to speak to his dad. His dad had flown in that day and was there with him at the police station. And so he asked, "Can I speak to my dad?" And they had to make a very split-second decision, and a really hard decision to make, because like I said, if his dad came in and said, "Don't talk to them, ask for a lawyer," it was pretty much over at that point. But they decided, you know what, we're gonna let him think that we still trust him, and they let his dad come in to talk to him. So his dad comes in, and really fast, he says, "Chris, what is going on? Where are the girls?" And Chris pretty much immediately said, "I hurt them. I hurt Shannan." And he said, "What?" And he admitted to his dad that he had killed Shannan because he had walked into the girls' room to find her hurting them. So he was saying that Shannan killed the girls and he killed Shannan, which is exactly the same scenario that one of the detectives had given him right before all of this had happened. And the reason that she said this was because she wanted him to trust her. And one of the ways that she could do that was to kind of shift a little bit of the guilt away from him to make him feel more apt to confess. And so the detectives knew Shannan had nothing to do with this, but they wanted to get that initial confession from him so that they could move forward. So that's exactly what happened. He told his dad, "Shannan was hurting the girls. I walked in, I flew into a rage, and I hurt her." So investigators came in and said, "Can you tell us exactly what you just told your dad?" And he did. And so at this point, they're like, "Tell us where they are. We need to know where they are. We want to find them and we want to get them home." And so he tells them, they bring out a map and he marked S for Shannan where he buried her body, and he marks a C and a B in the tanks where they will find Bella and Celeste. So after that, they arrested him and they immediately went out to the field to find Shannan, and they found her buried in a shallow grave. And they really wanted to find the girls that night, but by this time it was very late, and they knew that it was going to be an extensive search to get them out of the tanks. And so they waited until the next morning, and that is when they were able to retrieve Bella and Celeste out of the oil tanks. And from what I've seen of investigators that were there and police officers that were there, it was a horrific sight, and it's something that will haunt them forever. And this is coming from people that do this for a living. And so that just tells you how sad this actually is. So after they found the bodies of the Watts girls, the investigators and everybody started preparing for a trial, because that's what would come next. And they thought that this was going to last for years. They thought that it was going to be a very grueling process, and they were starting to line up interviews and find all of the evidence that they would need. And very quickly, Chris decided to plead guilty. And he did this so that he wouldn't have to go through a trial, and so that he could escape the death penalty. So Chris was charged with 5 counts of first-degree murder. He was charged with 1 count for Shannan, 2 counts for Bella, and 2 counts for Celeste. And he was charged with 1 count of unlawful termination of a pregnancy for baby Nico. And he was charged with 3 counts of tampering with a deceased human body. So Chris Watts is currently in a Wisconsin prison serving 3 life sentences plus 84 years. So he's never getting out of prison. He will die in prison. Once he pled guilty and was charged and sent to prison, the detectives on the case felt lots of relief because they knew that justice had been served, but they were also left feeling kind of like something was missing. They had never been able to hear him actually outline what happened that night. And so they decided to go make a visit to him in prison so that he could admit it and say it out loud what actually happened that night. There are a couple different variations of what happened. According to Chris, he has changed his story a couple different times, but the initial story that he gave investigators when he was in prison was that Shannan came home at 1:48 a.m. that night and went to bed. And the next morning, his alarm went off at 4 a.m. like every morning, and they started having a discussion. And I don't know who initiated the conversation, but it was a heated conversation, and they were talking about their relationship and the next steps. So he said at some point during this conversation, he climbed on top of Shannan and started to strangle her. And at some point during this process, Bella walked into the bedroom and noticed what he was doing and asked if mommy was okay. So he loaded Shannan into the cab of the truck. He said that he put her on the floorboard in the back seat, and he also put the girls in the back seat. And he said so that the girls didn't have to look at her, he covered her with 2 trash bags. And she was also wrapped in a sheet from their bed. So he drove out to his work site and he buried Shannan while the girls sat in the back of the truck. And this is when he killed Cece. He smothered her in front of her sister, and he went and put her in the oil tank. He came down, and that's when he smothered Bella, and then he put her in the other oil tank. And from what I've seen and heard and read, these openings on these oil tanks were not very big, and so he would have had to really push them in, and it wouldn't have been a gentle process, which is very, very sad to think that a father could do that to his children that he seemingly loved up until very, very recently. And it's just something that I don't want to think about, or it's just sad. So after he got rid of their bodies, he just went to work like normal and started working. And then that afternoon is when Nicole called him and started the search for the girls. So that's everything that happened. That's the complete timeline of the case. I don't think that I'm missing anything important, but if I am, please leave me a comment down below and let me know. I want to make sure that everything that I'm saying is factual and is just correct. Some people believe that Chris's mistress was somehow involved in the planning and the murder of his family. Police very, very quickly decided that she was not involved, and they cleared her. And so I tend to lean towards what the police believe. I think that they did a fantastic job of investigating this case, and I don't think that they would have left a stone unturned, and I don't think that they would have missed anything that important. So I am leaning towards what the police say, and I think that it was only Chris that was involved. And I think that maybe it was just a coincidence with the searches. I think maybe she was just a little bit overzealous with the wedding planning, and I think that, I mean, I don't know when she searched for Amber Frey, but I would almost think that maybe she did it after she found out about the murders, because she was a mistress and he killed his family. So I don't know for sure, but let me know what you think. Do you think that she was involved or not? Like I said, I don't think that the police would have cleared her if they had any inkling that she was involved in any part of it. I think that Shannan's friend Nicole Atkinson was 100% the best thing that happened in this case. I think that she really took charge, took the lead, and knew that something was wrong with her friend and didn't take no for an answer. I believe that if she hadn't followed her gut instinct and called the police when she did and had them search the house, I think that it would have taken a lot longer for police to kind of zero in on Chris and be able to prove anything. I think that he felt the pressure of them being in the home and noticing all of the things that were still there that shouldn't have been. And so I think that Nicole Atkinson 100% is the hero in this case, and she stood up and defended her friend when her friend wasn't able to do that for herself anymore. This case is really one of the saddest cases that I've ever looked into. I don't know if it's just because I have 3 children of my own and I can't even fathom what happened to Shannan and her children, but this should have been one of the happiest times in her life. She had 2 beautiful little girls. She had a beautiful home, a thriving career, and a baby on the way. And instead of it being this joyous time in her life, she was stressed and she was sad and she was scared, and her husband ended up doing the unthinkable to her and her children. And it's just heartbreaking, honestly. It's one of the saddest things that I've ever investigated. I don't understand how a guy can go from being this happy, perfect husband and father to being a cold-blooded killer. I've watched videos of Shannan and Chris with their kids, and he really does seem like a good dad. I just don't understand how he went from that to killing them. Maybe he was just a monster all along and he did a really, really good job of hiding it. Maybe he fell in love with his mistress, or he thought that he did, and it kind of warped his brain. I don't know, but it's hard to think that he went from this man that Shannan trusted and gave these children to taking their lives. Shannan was a great wife, a wonderful mother. She excelled in her career. She had lots of friends, and she was just overall a really, really great person. And I think that you can kind of get a sense of her personality from watching her videos. She was really active on social media, and so if you start watching those videos, you kind of feel like you know her almost. And I want people to remember that about her. I don't want people to remember what Chris did to her. I don't want that to be her story. I want her story to be how she was just the best mom and how much she loved her children. And I also want to remember those sweet little babies. I want to remember Bella and Celeste and little Nico. And I want them to be the important part of this case. I don't want anybody to even think about Chris anymore. I think that he is despicable, and I think that he should be forgotten in this case, and it should be all about Shannan and how perfect she was with her children. So that is the case of the Watts family murders. It's a sad case. It's a hard case. It's incredibly difficult to look at the evidence, but if we can learn something from it, and if one person can be helped from that information, then I think that it needs to be out there. I think if you are feeling like your husband or your partner or your wife even could do something like this, if you start to feel scared for yourself, listen to your gut instinct, because it's there for a reason and it's not going to lead you astray. So thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you liked it. I hope that you learned something from it. If I'm missing anything about the case, please let me know. And if you like this kind of video, please subscribe. I'm going to be doing a new video every week, and I think that it's great to get the voices of those that can't talk anymore out there. So on that note, I will see you guys next time. Bye.